Welcome to the Bowtie Biotech podcast, where science meets business. If breakthrough biotech, bold innovations, and the business behind the science gets you excited, you're in the right place. Make sure to check us out on Substack, X, and LinkedIn at Bowtie Biotech for even more insights and updates. All right, we've got a lot to cover today, so let's dive right in.
Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. We're tackling the world of pharmaceuticals today. Got a whole bunch of articles here covering everything from exciting FDA approvals to some shakeups in the industry. Should be a fascinating deep dive.
Yeah, it's always something in this industry, isn't it?
It really is. So one of the biggest stories that caught my eye was about AbbVie finally getting FDA approval for their Parkinson's drug, Vyalev. This one kind of had a long road to approval, didn't it?
It did. And it's great news for patients who haven't had much luck with the existing treatments.
And what's really interesting to me is the delivery system. It's like an insulin pump, providing continuous medication. Imagine, no more struggling with pills. This could be a game changer, don't you think, for Parkinson's patients?
It's a huge step forward, definitely. For patients with advanced Parkinson's, the oral medications often become less effective. And then we see those really difficult symptoms like tremors and trouble with movement. Vyalev offers a whole new way to manage those symptoms, and that's going to make a real difference in their lives.
It really underscores how important innovation is in this field, especially when we're talking about neurological conditions. But, speaking of innovation, we also have to talk about Sage Therapeutics.
Oh, right. Sage Therapeutics. Definitely interesting developments there.
Yeah, so they did get FDA approval for their postpartum depression drug, Zurzuvae.
Which is great news.
It is. But at the same time, they're streamlining their drug pipeline, and unfortunately, that means layoffs for a big chunk of their workforce. It's kind of a bittersweet situation, wouldn't you say?
It really highlights the challenges of drug development, that's for sure. Clinical trials, you never know how those are going to play out. It seems like they are kind of refocusing their strategy based on, the success of Zurzuvae, but also that setback with their Alzheimer's drug.
It really feels like a classic one step forward, two steps back scenario, which unfortunately we see a lot in this field. Developing new treatments, especially for something as complex as Alzheimer's, has to be one of the biggest challenges in medicine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially with Alzheimer's, researchers just keep hitting these roadblocks. This latest setback with Sage's drug is a perfect example of just how difficult it is to understand and target Alzheimer's, at a fundamental level.
It's a good reality check, isn't it? We need to celebrate the wins, for sure, but also acknowledge that the road to these medical breakthroughs, it's never a straight line. That whole thing about the challenges of treating those complex brain disorders?
Yeah.
It makes me think about what Wave Life Science is doing. They're working with RNA editing.
Right.
And they just came out with some interesting early trial data for a rare lung and liver disease, I think it was.
Interesting.
It seems like they're approaching treatment from a whole new angle.
It's a really fascinating approach. Instead of using CRISPR to edit the DNA directly.
Right.
They're focused on RNA, which could be a more precise way to go about it. And importantly, it's reversible.
It's like it almost sounds too good to be true to be able, to be that precise. So how does it work? How does this RNA editing actually work?
Okay, so imagine you have a recipe.
Okay.
And there's a typo in the recipe. Now, instead of scratching out the whole thing and rewriting it, with RNA editing, you can just correct that one typo.
Oh.
That's what Wave is doing. They use these synthetic molecules, oligonucleotides they're called, and those are delivered right into the cells. And what they do is they guide an enzyme. This enzyme's called ADAR, and that enzyme makes very specific changes to the RNA.
So instead of changing the whole blueprint, the DNA, you're just kind of tweaking the instructions a bit, right?
Exactly.
What would you say are the pluses and minuses of that approach compared to, CRISPR?
So I think a major advantage here is that it's potentially reversible. Think about it. RNA molecules are always being produced and broken down in the cell.
Right.
So it's not a permanent change like a DNA edit. And that has huge implications, especially when we're thinking about safety and the long-term effects, unintended consequences.
Right.
Now, the challenge, the big one, at least right now, is that it's still early days. We still haven't quite figured out how to deliver these therapies efficiently. To the right cells, I mean.
It's always a trade-off, isn't it? Every new technology comes with these potential benefits.
Right.
But then, there's work to be done.
Always.
It'll be really interesting to see where RNA editing goes in the next few years. But kind of switching gears a little bit, another story I thought was really interesting was about Sanofi. They made a big move into radiopharmaceuticals, partnered with Orano Med.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of buzz around radiopharmaceuticals right now. It seems like everyone's trying to get in on the action.
It's like a whole race for these innovative cancer treatments. Why all the interest in these targeted therapies, would you say?
Well, with radiopharmaceuticals, you can really target those cancer cells.
Okay.
It's like delivering radiation therapy directly to the tumor. And that means you minimize the damage to healthy tissue, which is a big deal. This is especially promising for rare cancers, I think, where chemo might not be so effective. Or the side effects could be really rough.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sanofi actually invested a ton in this, something like $325 million. Seems like they're serious about catching up to the big players like Novartis in this area.
It's a smart move for sure.
Yeah.
The radiopharmaceutical market is, it's growing rapidly. And Sanofi sees that potential for, well, major returns. Partnering with Orano Med gives them access to, the expertise and resources they might not have otherwise. Orano Med really knows their stuff, especially when it comes to the lead-212-based radiopharmaceuticals. That's a very specialized area. It's a classic case of a big company making a strategic move to get a piece of a rapidly expanding market.
It seems like the pharmaceutical world is just as much about business as it is about, scientific discovery.
Oh, absolutely.
Speaking of discovery, one trend I think we have to talk about is AI. AI in drug development. We're seeing companies like Sanofi, flagship pioneering, they're really embracing it. Makes you wonder, is this the key to even faster drug discovery? It really feels like we're on the verge of a whole new era, don't you think? With AI coming into the picture.
It's really remarkable when you think about it. The ability to analyze these massive data sets, pinpoint potential drug targets, even design new molecules. AI can do all that, and at a speed we never could have imagined before.
It's mind-blowing, really. And I love this idea of accelerated serendipity that some researchers are talking about.
Right. It's not about replacing human ingenuity. It's about giving it a boost.
Exactly. Helping us see those connections faster, ask better questions. But, with any big shift, there are always those questions about, well, the balance between humans and machines.
Oh, for sure. That's the big one, isn't it?
Especially in biopharma. What are your thoughts on that? Finding that balance?
Well, it's about using AI responsibly, right? AI can accelerate the whole R&D process, but we can't forget about the human element. We need that oversight, especially when we start thinking about the ethics of it all, patient safety, all of that.
It's about using these powerful tools in a way that benefits everyone, basically.
Exactly. And it makes me think about another interesting trend we're seeing, kind of related to this whole human element thing.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of people actually leaving the industry, going back to academia.
You're kidding, really?
Yeah. And it seems kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it? At first, you think about job security, you think people want to stay in the industry. But it seems like some folks are looking for something more.
Interesting. What are they saying?
Well, Biospace, they did a poll recently, and a lot of the people they talked to said they wanted to focus on fundamental research,
Getting back to the basics, kind of.
Right. Or they're passionate about teaching, mentoring that next generation of scientists.
It's like they want to give back in a different way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And universities are realizing how valuable these folks are, They bring all that practical experience, the industry knowledge.
Yeah, it's a win-win, really.
It really is. But, speaking of navigating complex landscapes.
Oh boy, here we go.
We have to talk about the FDA's accelerated approval pathway.
That's the big one, isn't it? Always a lot of debate around that.
There is, and for good reason.
Yeah.
It's designed to get those potentially life-saving drugs to patients faster, especially the folks who don't have time to wait.
Right. Makes sense. But there's a downside, I'm guessing.
Well, the FDA can give the green light based on something called surrogate endpoints.
Which basically means?
It means they don't have all the long-term data yet. They're relying on markers that suggest a drug might work. It's a risk, but sometimes it's a risk worth taking.
And sometimes it doesn't work out, right?
Right. We saw that with Aduhelm, the Alzheimer's drug, and Oxbryta for sickle cell. Both ended up being pulled off the market.
So how do we find that balance between getting these treatments out quickly, but also making sure they're safe, effective?
It's the million-dollar question. It's complicated. I don't think there's a simple answer. But the FDA is working on making the whole process better, streamlining those confirmatory trials.
So transparency is key here, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. The more transparent everyone is, the better. And it kind of brings us full circle, doesn't it? This whole conversation. We have to balance those scientific advances with, the ethical side of things. We have to push those boundaries, but never forget about the patient.
It's a delicate balance for sure, but an incredibly important conversation to have. Wow, we covered a lot today, didn't we?
Right.
Breakthrough therapies, drug development, AI, even talked about people leaving the industry.
It's a fascinating time to be following this world, that's for sure.
It really is. Never a dull moment. That's a wrap for our deep dive this week, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
You have been listening to the Bowtied Biotech podcast. Make sure to check us out on Substack, X, and LinkedIn at Bowtied Biotech for even more insights and updates. We appreciate your support and see you next week.